According to research, over 80% of the Fortune 500 companies use psychometrics in the hiring process. Today, I'm going to take you through how to be prepared and how to ace some of these psychometrics. Top of the morning once again, my name is Tshidi and I'm back with a brand new video. Today's video is focusing on mastering psychometric assessment and how to prepare for them. If you've ever gone through psychometrics and you panicked and you didn't know what to do, trust me, you're not alone. Everybody that goes through psychometrics has got the same type of fear, so fear not, because this will be a crash course on how to prepare for those psychometrics and how to ace them. What are psychometrics? Psychometrics are designed to measure somebody's cognitive abilities as well as personality traits. So that's what companies use them for. It's things that they cannot necessarily answer in job interviews, so they throw them in the psychometrics, where there's a specific group of questions that you'll be asked to try and understand whether you'll be able to do the job. It helps the company with the predictability of that candidate to do the job, as well as understanding how they solve problems, how they process information, and lastly, how they interact with others. And they can also sometimes, in most cases, be the end of your recruitment process, because if your psychometrics are too far out of what the company is looking for, they'll normally decline you based on some of those, but they won't tell you that part. There are three most popular assessments that we're going to talk about. The first one is cognitive test. This is actually used to measure your reasoning as well as your memory and your problem solving skills. If you've ever played with a puzzle where you're trying to figure out, what last card you saw and you're trying to flip it open and over, this is what the cognitive test normally would look at. The second test that we normally have is the personality test. The personality test is actually used to evaluate your behavior, style, as well as whether you fit into the company culture. That's what they use it specifically for. And the last one that we've got is the situational judgment test. Now, the situational judgment test is how do you handle situations that are related to that job? If we throw you into this particular situation, how do you handle it based on the fact that it is required for you to be XYZ in that particular job? So those are the three most popular ones, and I'll get back to them right now. But there are some other assessments that normally you might come across that are very important for different companies and different industries. The first one that we've got is the skills test. Now, the skills tests are normally used by a lot of tech companies. For example, if we test out developers to make sure that they can actually really write code. So those are normally very specific to very specialized industries. So that's one of the things that they do. Administration ones, for example, when they test whether you can, how many words you can type in a second, how many words you can type in a minute, legal work, those are the skills tests that they'll normally do. The second one is the emotional intelligence test. This is normally done by healthcare providers, because with emotional intelligence, they want to make sure that when you're dealing with clients or you're dealing with different people in that space, you can be able to deal with your emotions whenever you are thrown in the deep end. Educators are normally required to do this. For anybody that's got kids, you know why it's important sometimes to have educators that have got a very high emotional intelligence, sales, and a few other areas. The next one is integrity tests. Now, integrity tests are normally in areas like retail, finance, law, areas where there's room for different things that could happen, that could tempt different people. So they test your integrity to make sure that you're actually not going to jump into the wrong side of the crowd. The next one is the physical ability tests. Those are, for example, where we're looking at the military, we're looking at police force, we're looking at sports, we're looking at warehousing, things that require you to be physically able to carry or do certain tasks. Those are normally the tests that they'll also do. The next one is the language proficiency test. So these are, for example, if you go into Australia, you're normally going to do a language proficiency test where you have to do the IELTS or the TOEFL. You'd normally require those. Education, tourism, they want you to have some of those. So those are the areas that look at the language proficiency test. And then the role-specific test. Those ones could be for any other role. You could find that at tech companies requiring very, very specific tests that they'll come in with. So there's a whole host of those. And the last one is the aptitude test. Almost all industries actually do that to be able to say, can you learn when it comes to some of the things that you've got? So those are the list of tests that you could actually come across. But first, we're going to jump into the cognitive test. Remember, I mentioned that there are three main primary ones that I want us to focus on. The first one that we're going to talk about is the cognitive test. First question that a lot of people ask is, how do I prepare for a cognitive test? So one of the questions that I get from some of the candidates is, I have assessments, how do I prepare? Cognitive test is all about practice. Practice, practice, practice. Practice as regularly as you can. There are a lot of host of different websites where you can find the different cognitive tests. So if you look at SHL, you've got other websites like Job Test Prep. Those are the different tests that you actually have. They offer a whole host of tests that you can actually go into. So some of those, you can go into them, go practice and see how well you can actually deal with some of those. The reality about some of these things that because they are timed, you want to make sure that you actually practice as much as you can and you start seen the sequence and the way that they actually ask certain questions. Because some of the tests that they normally have when it comes to cognitive is that they get more difficult the easier you answer certain questions, and they get a lot easier the harder you struggle to answer some of the questions. So in some cases, you might start realizing that the test is getting easier. It's not because you are nailing it. It's sometimes because the test start assessing how well you answer some certain questions, and they start making it a bit easier for you. It's very important when it comes to cognitive to make sure that you enhance your problem solving skills, because that's what it is. Cognitive is all about, can you solve problems that are thrown at you? And you need to make sure that you actually do different activities that boost your ability to be able to solve whatever small little problem. That's how you prepare for a cognitive test. The next one that we've got is the personality test. Now, this one I always tell people, the easiest thing that you can ever do with a personality test is to please be yourself. A lot of people tend to try and trick the personality test. And what then happens is that your personality in the interview versus your personality in the assessment come across as two different people. Personality test, the best thing that you want to do is to make sure that you're authentic and you be yourself. Trying to actually trick this test can actually backfire, because in some cases you'll find that, the test keeps on asking 10 different questions differently, and your answers will normally come across as non-authentic. And at the moment they come across as not authentic, the company's going to look at you and say, you're not an authentic person because you tried to take the assessment. So that's why I'm saying understanding yourself and how you answer certain questions is very important when it comes to the personality test. You need to first obviously understand the desired trait. Even though I'm saying be honest, understand what the desired traits are. Look at what the values of the company is. What are they looking at? So if, for example, they're looking for certain things that are talking about, honesty and this and that, be as honest as you can, because it will come across in that particular results as you being honest. But if you're not being honest, and the results come across as you being dishonest, unfortunately, you're not going to get that job. The last one is the situational judgment test. Unfortunately, this one is also very tricky to actually assess it unless you haven't done the job. So if you've been a recruiter before and somebody throws something to do with recruitment, which is a situational judgment test, it's easier for you to answer it because you can always refer back to your previous experience. Now, with the situational judgment tests, if you have not done that job, please make sure that the recruiter understands that you haven't done that job before and it's actually a brand new thing. But make sure that you're honest in that, because then you actually can play certain roles that say, if this is like this, then I can be able to do this. So remember, sometimes you come from recruitment and you go into a completely different field. Now, because of that, there are similarities in how you do certain things. So always apply whatever you've learned in your previous role into the next job. Rest well before you actually do assessments. One of the mistakes that people tend to make is they go throughout most of the night trying to do assessments. For anybody that's ever written an exam while they're very exhausted, unfortunately, your brain tends to be a bit fogged up. So my advice to anybody that's doing an assessment the next day is try and make sure that you sleep a bit earlier than you normally would. Try and make sure that you actually rest as much as you can. And in most cases, we always advise that if you're going to do that assessment, make sure that you do it as early in the morning as possible before you get clogged up with so many different thoughts and different questions that you have to answer at work. And then the next thing is prepare physically before you actually do the test. If you need water, make sure that you have your water with you. If you need any pencils, if you need any pens, if you need anything on that side for you, please make sure that everything is physically ready and available for you. Mainly because most of these tests are timed. The longer you take, the longer they think that you actually had another laptop next to you and you're still Googling some of the answers. So try and make sure that everything that you need is with you at that particular table. On the day of the test, make sure that you read instructions carefully. Mistake that a lot of us tend to make is we tend to skip through some of the instructions because you're thinking, this thing is timed, but then you end up answering the wrong things. So try and make sure that you read through the instructions and make sure that you actually understand those instructions before you jump into answering whatever question they're throwing at you. Secondly, manage your time. Managing your time is very important because there's nothing worse than knowing that you're halfway through and you see that you're left with 2 minutes and you start panicking and you start answering for the sake of answering. I would advise you not to do that. So what I would like to do is try and make sure that in your practice test that you're doing, you try as hard as you can to also manage your time. So make sure that you manage your time and you make sure that you allocate a specific time to each one of the questions. If, for example, in some cases, they'll tell you that you've got 50 questions, try and make sure that if they say to you, this is going to be taking you about an hour, you try to allocate at least a minute to a minute and a half in each one of the questions so that you bought yourself enough time. And then lastly, the most important thing that you should remember that preparation is key. So make sure that you're prepared. And remember, go to SHL, go to Job Test Prep, search for some of the practice tests that you could ever find, or just go online on Google and search for practice tests. You'll find as many as you can and make sure that you practice. So if you've gone through your first interview and your recruiter says to you, we'll be scheduling for you an assessment judgment test, or we'll be scheduling for you a psychometric test, please make sure that you go online, search for test, and practice as much as you can. Because sometimes you'll find that one of the questions that you actually dealt with in the practice test is one of the questions that they'll ask you in the next psychometrics. Top of the morning once again. Thank you so much for watching this video till the end. Until the next video, peace.